He conquered the known world before his 33rd birthday. His name is etched into history as the ultimate military genius, a man who never lost a battle. Alexander the Great. His empire stretched from Greece to India, the largest the world had ever seen. Yet within moments of his death, this colossal creation began to tear itself apart, devoured by the very men who helped him build it. How could a man so brilliant at conquest be so blind to the future? This is the story of Alexander's fatal flaw, the paradox of a man who could win the world, but couldn't make it last. Born in 356 BC, Alexander inherited more than just the throne of Macedon from his father, Philip II. He inherited a revolutionary army and a burning ambition to punish the Persian Empire for its past invasions of Greece. From the moment he crossed the Hellespont into Asia Minor, his campaign was a whirlwind of strategic audacity. At the Granicus River, he led a cavalry charge straight into the enemy ranks. At Issus, he shattered the numerically superior Persian army, forcing its king, Darius III, to flee and leave his own family behind. The great coastal city of Tyre defied him, believing its island fortress was impregnable. Alexander simply built a causeway across the sea, a monumental feat of engineering, and took the city by storm. Egypt welcomed him not as a conqueror, but as a liberator, crowning him pharaoh and declaring him a son of the god Amun. Here he founded Alexandria, a city that would become a beacon of learning and culture for centuries. But he didn't stop. His drive was relentless, almost superhuman. He pursued Darius deep into the heart of Persia, finally crushing him at the Battle of Gaugamela. This victory handed him the keys to the Persian Empire. The legendary cities of Babylon, Susa, and Persepolis, with their unimaginable treasures, were his. He marched into the grand palace of Persepolis, the symbolic heart of Persian power, and in a fateful act of vengeance and perhaps drunken rage, burned it to the ground. His ambition, however, was not yet satisfied. The world was still bigger. He pushed his weary army further east, over the Hindu Kush mountains, into the unknown lands of modern-day Afghanistan and Pakistan. He fought Indian kings with their terrifying war elephants at the Battle of the Hydaspes, another stunning victory against impossible odds. His men, exhausted and homesick after 8 years of constant marching and fighting, finally refused to go further. They had reached the edge of their world and their endurance. A reluctant Alexander finally turned back. In just a decade, he had forged an empire that dwarfed all others. He was the undisputed master of a vast and diverse territory. The world was his, but this is where the story of conquest ends and the story of failure begins. The very qualities that made Alexander a peerless general were the ones that made him a flawed statesman. He was a man of action, of the next battle, the next horizon. He governed his empire like a military campaign, on the move, from the saddle. His administrative structure was largely improvised. He simply kept the existing Persian system of satrapies, or provinces, and placed his Macedonian generals or local nobles in charge. It was a practical solution, but not a long-term one. It created a network of powerful, ambitious men with their own armies and territories, men whose loyalty was primarily to Alexander himself, not to a new unified empire. He envisioned a fusion of Greek and Persian cultures, a new Greco-Persian ruling class. This was a radical idea for its time. He encouraged his soldiers to marry Persian women and even held a mass wedding ceremony at Susa, where he and his top generals took noble Persian wives. He adopted elements of Persian dress and court ceremony, demanding that his Macedonian and Greek subjects perform the ritual of proskynesis, a form of bowing or prostration reserved for the Persian king. To his rugged Macedonian veterans, this was blasphemy. They saw their king, their comrade in arms, transforming into an Eastern despot. They followed him out of personal loyalty and the promise of glory, but they bristled at these changes. The cultural integration was superficial, forced from the top down, and it bred resentment on both sides. The empire was not a melting pot. It was an occupied territory held together by the force of one man's will. And then there was the most critical oversight of all: succession. For a king, securing the line of succession is paramount. It is the guarantee of stability, the promise that the kingdom will endure. Alexander had a son, but he was born right around the time of his death. He had a half-brother, but he was considered mentally unfit to rule. Who would inherit this colossal, fragile empire? When his generals gathered around his deathbed in Babylon and asked him to whom he left his kingdom, his final whispered words were supposedly toi kratistoi, to the strongest. Whether he actually said these words or not, they perfectly predicted what would happen next. It was a death sentence for his empire. He had named no heir. He had created no institution, no senate, no council that could manage the transition of power. He had built an empire that was entirely dependent on him, and without him it had no center. It was a house of cards, and Alexander himself had just pulled out the bottom card. The news of his death in 323 BC, likely from fever, sent shockwaves across the empire. The collapse was not gradual. It was immediate and violent. Before his body was even cold, his generals, the very men who had fought by his side, began carving up the world he had conquered. These men, who would become known as the Diadochi, or the successors, were not interested in preserving Alexander's vision. They were interested in power. Perdiccas, the initial regent, tried to hold it all together, but he was assassinated within 2 years by his own rivals. What followed was 4 decades of brutal, relentless warfare known as the Wars of the Diadochi. It was a world-spanning civil war. Ptolemy seized Egypt, establishing a dynasty that would last for 300 years, ending with Cleopatra. Seleucus took the vast eastern territories from Syria to India, founding the Seleucid Empire. Antigonus the One-Eyed tried to reunite the whole empire under his rule, but was defeated and killed. Lysimachus and Cassander carved out their own kingdoms in Thrace and Macedon. They fought each other, formed alliances, broke them, and fought again. In this bloody scramble for power, Alexander's legacy was torn to shreds. His family was brutally eliminated to remove any legitimate claimants to the throne. His wife Roxana and his young son, Alexander IV, were imprisoned and murdered. His mother, Olympias, was executed. His half-brother, Philip Aridaeus, was also killed. The Argead dynasty, which had ruled Macedon for centuries, was extinguished. The man who conquered the world couldn't even protect his own son. The dream of a unified Hellenistic empire died with him. In its place rose a collection of warring states, each claiming to be the true successor to Alexander, but none capable of recreating his whole. So we are left with the great historical question: was Alexander truly great? As a military tactician, absolutely. He was a genius, perhaps the greatest in history. His strategies are still studied at military academies today, but an empire is more than just conquered land. It requires institutions, laws, a shared identity, and a plan for the future. Alexander built none of these. He was a conqueror, not a founder. He was a warrior, not a statesman. His fatal flaw was his belief that his own personal momentum could substitute for stable governance. He smashed the old world order, but never built a new one to replace it. He created a power vacuum that could only be filled by violence. His legacy is therefore a profound cautionary tale. It teaches us that true greatness is not just about the power you can seize, but about what you build to outlast you. Alexander the Great conquered the world, but he failed to give it a future. And for that reason, his magnificent, unparalleled empire was destined to be little more than a brilliant, fleeting flash in the long, dark story of history. Thanks for watching. If you found this story fascinating, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more deep dives into the greatest triumphs and failures of the past.